if we cross the streams like many are doing today, and dad is the spiritual leader at home, but then mom's the spiritual leader at church.
Right.
That doesn't go together. You can always reach out to us at littleben@gmail.com. That would be interesting.
It would be.
Whoever owns that account.
Welcome to the Theology Is Fun podcast with Dr. Corey and Dr. Ben.
All right, we're back, boys and girls, here on Theology Is Fun. My main man right here, Dr. Ben, and we are coming to you not live, recorded on the YouTube and all of our audio platforms. Thank you for listening. If you're on YouTube,
Like and subscribe.
you can like and subscribe. We're so thrilled to have all of you with us, and we have our little Corey, little Ben here with us yet again.
Yep.
This is the second episode they've been together. One much better looking than the other. I'll let you all decide who that is.
But this is the brain trust, without question.
Oh, it's the brain trust,
Yeah,
100%.
That's right.
So thanks for being with us. We are talking about the role of women in the local church, whether or not women can be pastors. And so if you didn't catch last episode, you can go back and get caught up on that. We actually covered more than we thought we would cover in that episode. It was a little longer episode than usual, but that's what happens, ladies and gentlemen, when you involve yourself with Dr. Ben Skog.
I have the gift of loquaciousness.
Yes, you are very loquacious, my brother. But no, you can go back, listen to that. Essentially, we're doing this topic because it is, I mean, if it's not the main kind of issue that churches are wrestling with, it's one of. Right?
Yeah.
In our day and time.
Yeah.
And so we want to hit it theologically. We talked about egalitarianism versus complementarianism. So if those are new terms for you, egalitarianism basically says men and women are equal across the board in roles, in essence, in value and all that. Complementarians believe that men and women are equal in worth, in value, in dignity, but that there are God-given differences with respect to role. Mm-hmm. And that impacts authority, responsibility. So we talked about that. Ben and I believe the scriptures teach a complementarian perspective.
Right.
So we're talking about when it comes to the church, whether or not women can be pastors. We're talking about this office. We're not talking about Christians in general, serving, evangelizing, teaching. Of course, based on Titus 2, women should be teaching. They should be influencing other women, right? They should be teaching and training. All Christians should have some kind of ministry of evangelism and serving others.
Right.
What we're talking about here are the offices of the New Testament church. There are two, pastor or elder or minister or overseer, and then there is the office of a deacon.
Right. And that's a huge distinction to make. That at the moment that we are saved by Christ, we enter into union with Christ. And as we enter into union with Christ in our relationship, all of us, right, every single person who is a believer in Jesus Christ have entered into what's called the universal priesthood, right, or the priesthood of believers. This is how, think of this as Jesus saying that we're called to be salt and light. Every one of us are called to be faithful to the word out and about as we go, to our coworkers, to our neighbors. Of course we're supposed to teach. Of course we're supposed to evangelize. Of course we're supposed to be winsome. Of course we're supposed to be servants. So we cannot confuse the issue of priesthood of the believer or general salt and light with the offices of the church, of which there are two, the two that you mentioned.
Yes. So 1 Timothy 3, and Ben touched on this last episode, if you're going to be a pastor, an elder, an overseer, a minister in a professional sense, you've got to meet all those criteria.
Yeah, that's right.
Not one or two.
That's right. It is, and it's not I'm 3 out of 7. No,
I feel like you're being generous to yourself there, Ben.
Yeah, the self-evaluation, I was a little too generous of myself. But we have to remember that these things, these roles, these are not man's inventions. These are God's inventions. They're his ideas, and it's also his spiritual gifting. So in other words, not all men can be pastors. The men who are qualified to be pastors are those whom A, God calls, but also B, those whom God has equipped, not with a gift of teaching, but all of those gifts, not in perfection, of course, but to withstand a charge, a legitimate charge.
And those gifts are affirmed by the church.
Yes.
That's why these men are set apart. And we do believe, as Paul outlines in 1 Timothy 3, this is an office that God has given to the church.
That's right.
And he has gifted men, and actually I would say burdened men, with the responsibility and the authority to lead. And there will be a greater accountability in the judgment for those who are teachers in that sense, and those
Clearly
who are leaders. Right. So here's a big thing. We didn't get into this specifically last episode. I just want to mention it here, Ben. The connection between an elder, pastor, overseer, managing his house well, and then managing the household of God well, that's an expectation. And in part, this is one of the reasons I don't see 1 Timothy 2 or 3 allowing women to serve as pastors, not because women are less than men, they are not, but in terms of the roles and the expectation for men, one of our responsibilities, those who are called to ministry or the pastoral overseer office, is that there is leadership in both the home and the church. And Paul says, if you can't lead in the home and you can't be the spiritual leader of your home, you can't be the spiritual leader of the house of God.
Yeah, you're disqualified.
But also, if we cross the streams like many are doing today, and dad is the spiritual leader at home, but then mom's the spiritual leader at church.
Right.
That doesn't go together. And that's not at all what we see in Genesis 2, which Paul references in 1 Timothy 2.
Right.
And so there's a lot of layers to this, but all of them, I think, through the lens of right interpretation, get us to equality between men and women with respect to our significance, our dignity, our worth, our value, but differences in roles.
That's right.
And that's where in 1 Timothy 2, if you didn't see our episode last week, Paul's not saying that women should submit to ungodliness or to sin. No, the word is deference. Women should defer to the burden of leadership and responsibility that God has placed on men in the context of the local church. And men should not abuse that leadership authority or that responsibility. They should lead with integrity and love. And as Paul says in 1 Timothy 3, not with greed or not as a bully. It's opposite of what has happened to us in the fall, where women are trying to fill the leadership that God's assigned to men, and men are either advocating and letting them, or they're trying to bully them out of it, and you have this innate tension. The church should not reflect that.
That's right. It is, instead of either male or female headed toward that exchange, women trying to usurp it, men trying to let it go, or to be abusive, right? We reject that, what we called in Romans chapter 1, the wicked exchange, but go back to God's design. And here is where I think we need to have just a quick discussion on God's gifting and how God gifts, and then back up for a second and talk about this thing called a pastor is one who's gifted in all of those qualifications, not some of them, because part of the egalitarian argument is, and I've heard this on many occasions, someone will say, well, if God didn't want women to preach, why did he gift them with the ability to teach? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there are various people who have various gifts, but not the burden of responsibility of being an elder or an overseer.
That's right.
And I'll speak of my wife, for example. My wife is an amazing teacher and communicator.
She is.
When people hear her, they often no longer want to listen to me. And I can't blame them for that. She's a very gifted, insightful teacher, passionate in her communication. But she would be the first one to say God's not given her, biblically or otherwise, the responsibility to be an elder or an overseer in terms of the church.
And thus,
so a woman who has the gift of teaching, teach.
That's right.
But teach without violating the God-given structure of the church and the responsibility of men to exercise ultimate spiritual oversight and ultimate teaching, right?
Yeah. And so I think a great word, not just on that point, but then to apply this to all of our spiritual gifts, we are given gifts by God, and then we're given the responsibility to utilize those gifts for His glory and for the beneficial building up of the church. So that is the affirmation. That is gifts utilized rightly. Let's state it now opposite. What is sin? Sin is using any gift that God gives to us in a manner which violates His stated roles, or B, brings your self-glory rather than Him. So in other words, if I use whatever gifts that God has given to me, which is just one, which is the gift of barbecue, right? That's my only gift.
Yes, not queso, as we've learned recently, but barbecue. You're very good barbecue experts.
And that's it. But if I misuse my gift, either utilize it wrongly or utilize it for my own vainglory, then that is sin. So let this be said. Any gift not used according to God's design is by definition sin. That, like, we can't get around that. No matter how sensitive of an issue becomes culturally, we don't get to kind of walk that back and say, well, these are sins when we utilize these gifts in a manner in which God did not design. But this one isn't quite sin. Anytime any one of us as believers utilize our spiritual gift in a manner that is not with God's design, it is both the rejection of God in favor of some type of exchange.
Yeah, I'm with you. I see where you're going with that. It's important for me to make a distinction between those who are doing that willingly or stubbornly and those who are doing it sometimes unknowingly or well-intentioned. Like what I'm saying is,
Leviticus 4, those who are doing things without a high hand.
Yeah, you have people coming out of cultures or environments where maybe they're fulfilling their roles, we would say wrongly as complementarians, but they're not doing it stubbornly or defiantly. They think they are operating within the bounds of the New Testament.
Yeah. Okay.
Because they have a bad hermeneutic or they've had a bad legacy of teaching or whatever.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? I understand the sin principle.
Yes.
I just think we have to make a distinction on this issue that there are a lot of very well-intended people who may end up at the wrong place in the wrong practice, but who aren't doing it defiantly. Whereas I think there are others who are doing it defiantly.
Oh, absolutely.
But not, I don't think on this issue everyone is doing it for that reason.
So I would say all of it is sin in general. But
Yes, I understand what you're saying.
To those who do it with a high hand or great intentionality, are going to be held to a greater accountability.
Totally agree with that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And your point is well taken. We have to get it right to the best of our ability. That's why we're doing this topic.
Yes.
So having said all of that, we also want to say here in this episode, this is really, really important. And we teased this last episode, that even though we believe the office of elder, pastor, overseer, minister, and to use our terminology today, a lot of people see pastor, minister, we use that same word. In the New Testament, it's the word poimen, pastor, and then it's overseer, then it's elder. We believe that office must be held by a man. We believe that's consistent with what God expects for the family unit. We believe that is consistent with headship. And none of that in any way, biblically or otherwise, diminishes women or diminishes those who aren't called to those offices who are men. Everything comes down to, I love how Paul described it in terms of the body, right? Everybody has a part to play.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we're trying to flourish in those ways, but we're not belittling women at all. And to that end, let me just say, I have been in churches in context over the years where, if not in teaching, in practice, women were treated, or they would feel like second-class citizens, where they couldn't serve on a finance team, or they weren't invited to serve on a personnel team, but they could serve on the kitchen committee. You know what I mean? And I'm being dead serious. Like, there are places like that around the world where that happens. Yeah. And maybe the public stance is that everyone's equal, but people take what we believe and know to be true, 1 Timothy 2 and 1 Timothy 3, from a complementarian perspective, and they extend that into areas of leadership that are oppressive and hurtful. Like there are places where a woman can't pray in public on stage in the church, or can't serve as an usher, or can't give a ministry moment update, or, well, where is that in the Bible?
Right.
You know what I mean? I feel like there's unnecessary, even maybe ungodly bleed from his beautiful design in terms of headship and the offices that we're describing into other dynamics of leadership where there is no either biblical evidence to support that bleed. And I think there's a lack of understanding of how that can be hurtful to women.
Right. Absolutely.
And I've seen that over the years where, churches they get up in an uproar because a woman prayed in public. Well, that's much different than teaching in a mixed crowd, men and women, and then exercising the spiritual oversight of an elder.
So I think we would say in those cases, just as in a home, sometimes the head of the home can be sinful in either direction, either in laziness in giving or harshness.
Yes.
So too in churches, as sometimes in word, they're trying to uphold loving complementarianism. Yep. Sometimes as they act and in their deeds, they're really actually falling into that sin of harshness by pretending as though women have never done anything.
Yep.
Which, when we go back to Scripture in just a little bit, we're going to look at some women who did some amazing things.
Oh, incredible. You go back to the Old Testament. You have Deborah.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
And so just as in the home, we can neither abdicate nor can we be abusive, there's a just right? There's a just right temperature to that water that is exactly right. So too in the church, there's a careful balance to make sure that it's not an abdication, nor is it an abuse. Each church has to make sure we're doing right to make sure that it is a loving complementarianism, upholding the roles and the values, and say, here's what Scripture, I think, is saying that women can lead in, participate in. We'll get into Phoebe and the possibility of her being a deacon.
Yes.
But what we're saying is, God has said to the pastor, this is male qualified. But there's a lot of roles, a lot of leadership components and capacities that women can carry out.
Totally agree, and that's where I think it's important to say, right? I've never been a part of a church where women weren't key leaders.
Right.
Sure. In the church where Ben and I serve today, I mean, we have so many women who serve on our staff team in a high capacity. They serve on our ministerial team in a high capacity. Right. Literally, we would not be where we are today without the women who serve us so well, serve our church and our community with a gift,
and being utilized in the right sense with the right heart.
Yes, in the right roles and so forth. So we don't want to go too far. We don't want to have unnecessary bleed from complementarianism. And that has to be affirmed. And it doesn't just have to be affirmed in word. For those of you who are leaders in churches across the country, around the world, you need to embody that. Mm-hmm. The women on your staff team should be appreciated and valued. I think men are wise to understand that churches by necessity in terms of the pastoral office are going to be male-dominated cultures. Yeah. And we need to be sensitive to that and be respectful of that. And so there are a lot of dynamics here to consider, not just in saying as a complementarian, well, this is my view and it's the right view and it's the right, hermeneutical process to get to the right conclusions here. Okay. But to live it out in a way, like you said, that's not abusive, nor is it neglectful. Yeah. It's balanced.
That's right.
And I just think that's so important because again, there isn't a single church in the world today that could do what it does without the dynamic leadership qualities of the women who are part of that each fellowship.
Exactly as in a family, if you're missing one or the other, or if there's an absentee one or the other, the family isn't quite right. Right?
Yes.
And I think that example holds true that men and women come together and with kids, right? Like the everyone in the church has a role to play in the church, and without if someone's lacking or abusive, there's always an issue. Well, let me ask you this concerning each individual church, whether it's the autonomy of the church in a Baptist sense or a presbytery or something like that. Walk me through your understanding. So say a pastor's listening and they're saying, okay, all right, you guys, we think you guys are right, which that would be a miracle number one. right?
Yeah.
But then they want to go to their church and they want to apply it, and they find one of those areas that isn't quite clean.
Yeah.
And they're saying, okay, we want women to lead, but not as pastor. And so give me some examples of where you think it's good and right. And even I want to bring up the role of maybe a high school or maybe a middle school, I don't know, and our thoughts on what do we do about those areas that aren't so black and white, that aren't so clean, and that end up in the hands of the pastor or the elders. So go ahead.
Yeah. We want to talk about the gray. There is some gray. I mean, certainly if you're in a context where there's a school or you have an elementary, middle school, high school kind of ministry, there are a lot of places around the world where women are speaking in those environments. I would put that in the gray when you're talking about minors. I think every church has to establish where they're going to be with respect to minors. In other words, when does a young man become, in the eyes of the pastoral team, a man? Right? To where a woman would not be leading and exercising spiritual authority. And churches have to decide that. Some may say it's after high school. Some may say it's after middle school. Some may say it's after elementary. So that's fine. I would just encourage
by the
leaders.
Way, I love how he went back to the biblical principle, because it is man. It's man.
Yeah.
So
that's
it's
right.
when does someone move from boyhood into the realm of man? And that is all what we wrestled with last episode.
Yeah, and I have my own personal thoughts on that, but in general, I would just say, for those of you who are leaders in churches and you're wrestling through that, you need to ask yourself if it's a hill on which you're willing to die.
Right.
And I don't think in most of those kinds of situations that you're describing, we're talking about a hill on which to die. A lot of that kind of change can be led over time. Now, if you're talking about going to a church and you're going to serve as a student pastor and it's led by female lead pastors or preaching pastors or something, well, that's a different issue. That's an elevated issue over what you're describing.
Agreed.
In these other nuanced areas or where minors are involved or a school is involved and so forth, like in a chapel setting or something like that. So I would just say exercise wisdom and
wisdom. Yeah.
Don't die on a hill that you're not convinced is
and I think
worth dying on.
It's different also when you inherit a situation.
Totally agree.
Right. So if you as a pastor are inheriting a situation, know that it's through wisdom, the application of Scripture. You might not be where you want to be immediately. It might take teaching over time. It might be a year. It might be 2. It might be 5. But this might not be one of those issues, especially if it's a middle school or a high school thing that you're dealing with. It might not be we're day one dying on the hill. Yeah,
I'll give you an example of that. One of the churches God called me to pastor, when I went there, they had adult small group leaders, both men and women, who were doing the teaching. So I had some women teaching over men in adult life groups, mixed life groups, family life groups, small groups. And, I went into that specific ministry location. I was relatively young. It wasn't a day one issue for me to get up and say, here's what we're going to do. They didn't even know me yet. But I found this literally happened. And I'm not saying this will happen this smoothly in every location, okay? But by just preaching through the Bible, preaching through some of these issues when I got to the pastoral epistles or whatever, and just talking through in a practical, understandable, respectful way, the issues of headship and what we talked about in the last episode, I actually had small group leaders, female small group leaders, they met with me and they said, you know what, we realized we're in there with our husbands and we're the ones taking the lead and we're teaching over them. And that just doesn't seem to gel with what we're studying in the Scriptures. And they actually approached me before I had to address it. At some point it was going to have to be addressed as I earned credibility and relational capital and that trust, to be able to make some of those changes. But I was fascinated that it actually changed before I ever had to change it, because as they were encountering the Scriptures, they realized, there is like a flipping of roles between what happens in the home and what's happening here at church.
And so never forget that wisdom is always called for. And never forget that over time, with great teaching of the Word of God, God's will come to pass. and you'll be amazed at what God is doing in people's hearts and the application that sometimes they come to you and say,
yeah, that's right.
Man, we need to fix this.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, okay, so as we kind of wind down the episode today, I do want to hit one more thing. Really thinking through the blessing of women in leadership and the need for women in leadership, okay, even if it's not that pastoral office that we've been talking about.
Yep. Because
the New Testament speaks to this, right? We've got Priscilla, we've got Phoebe, we go back to Deborah in the Old Testament, and I would just say here, we're highlighting the much needed leadership of women in the church and in society, but we don't want to go where egalitarians go, which is to somehow, again, extrapolate what's happening in general and applying it to the specific office that God has assigned to men. Right. So in the case of Deborah, Ben, I would just say, we need women judges who lead with wisdom. I have no issue with a female president of the United States or a female governor. National Israel in a theocracy is much different than what we have with respect to the offices of the New Testament church.
In the church, right.
So for someone to go to Deborah and say, well, there you go, Deborah was a judge, therefore women are going to be pastors, is like, well, actually the Bible speaks to the offices of the church.
Yeah,
right? That's when we're talking about society and civic leadership and all the rest. And I know there was a spiritual dynamic to her leadership in terms of the exercising of wisdom and all that for the nation, but that's very different than the church is how I see it.
And there was, I don't think, and again, it's been a minute since I've read Judges, but I don't think that there was ever a moment in which, and again, this is in the book of Judges, where everyone is doing right in their own eyes. So in other words, it's in a time of when everything is in upheaval and nothing is going right.
That's right.
But I don't see her acting in a manner that it would undo her husband's leadership. So
never.
In other words,
that's the amazing thing about Deborah. People miss. She never usurps the authority of her husband. It's amazing.
And so while she's thrust into that, she maintains
deference.
Yes.
She's not. Yes.
Right.
Okay. The other thing is we talk about, but I mentioned that because we need women in the church.
Yes.
We need women in society.
Yes.
We need the leadership that women bring to the table in so many areas. We need women teaching women. We need women modeling to other women what it looks like to be a godly wife and mother and leader and Christian.
Yes.
We need that. Okay. And when you get to the prophetic passages, like the fulfillment of Joel in Acts 2, when you get to Priscilla and Aquila, again, there are many egalitarians who take that and say, look, boom, there's women are prophesying or women are serving. Like Phoebe potentially is a deacon. Yeah. And it's like, no, the fact that someone was prophesying in general or fulfilling a leadership role in that way in terms of teaching, whatever, that again, we have specificity with respect to the offices.
That's right.
And I would say this, when you go to 1 Timothy 3, the one requirement that's not given to deacons that is given to elders or overseers is the ability to teach.
Yeah.
And when it comes down to wives, there are some who suggest, and I think this is a legitimate interpretation, it could just be women there. Right? Now, that may not be your view or our view, whatever, but I'm just trying to say, when you come to deacons as an office, okay, different in terms of how you may interpret that.
Right.
But also vastly different because of the absence of the spiritual authority and oversight that an elder or a pastor possesses, right?
That's right.
So whether Phoebe's reserved to or referenced as a servant or a deaconess in a descriptive way of her service or her servant leadership, or whether she was a deacon, and that would be one's interpretation under an elder structure, that female deacons can be a part of their structure, fine. Yeah. That's still very different than suggesting that women can preach, teach over men and women, have that spiritual authority. Right. Because again, as we've laid out here these last two episodes, that brings a lot of other things into play, including family headship, all the rest. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's.
I think, and when we were at seminary, there was a great church there. They had the right elder model. In other words, it was a healthy elder model.
Plurality, men.
A plurality of elders. Yeah. And they are loving complementarians. And they had at least one female deacon. Yeah. And that they ensured that the role of deacon wasn't what sometimes a Baptist church does, where they make a deacon role really an elder role.
Yeah,
with
spiritual
authority.
oversight. It's administrative oversight. Yeah.
They were clear in their documents, and they were clear in the manner and the function of the church that this is a service role, and it was a leadership role. It was a good leading service role.
Yeah.
And so I thought it was an outstanding picture for incoming seminarians to see a healthy church carry that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's, on the one hand, I think egalitarians, again, they're trying to stretch these descriptions of Phoebe, Priscilla, of those who are prophesying way too far.
Right.
When it comes to the office of elder, overseer, pastor.
Right,
Okay.
that's right.
But on the other hand, and this is the point I was trying to make a moment ago, it does highlight how women have always had pivotal roles within the church, within the ministry of Jesus, within society at large. And right complementarianism, as you've been saying all along, Ben, balances, if you're a man, acceptance of a God-given role as a leader of your family, the one who's supposed to keep the serpent out of your garden. Mm-hmm. And if you're called to ministry, the one who's supposed to lead the church well. Okay. It's balance in that if you're a male, especially not abusive nor neglectful.
That's right.
And then for women, it's that deference to understand, okay, this is a burden of responsibility God's given my pastors who are responsible to teach and to preach and to lead. But that does not mean in any way as a woman, I can't lead.
That's right.
In a significant, profound way. And when everything comes together and everyone applies their gifts, Paul says it's like a body, hand and feet and arms and legs and
that's exactly
flobies and all the rest.
It is everyone coming together to saying, we're going to do our very best unto the Lord with what he's called us in the roles that he's called us and the way that he's called us and gifted us to bring glory to Jesus Christ. And that's what makes the church the church.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, now listen, if you have questions, comments, you want us to dive deeper on some specific aspect of this, please, if you're on YouTube, drop that in the comments. We'll be happy to interact with you and pick this up on a future episode. Or you can always reach out to us at littleben@gmail.com. That would be interesting.
It would be.
Whoever owns that account. But we're always happy to have you with us. Big topic here, these last two episodes. So be sure to interact with us. We would love to drill down deeper if that would be of help. And if you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and you'll get all these drops fresh every single week. We'll see what happens in the next episode.
Yeah, we will. I anticipate that we will probably have an episode of maybe some frequently asked questions and
about where you're wrong on this issue.
I think we know the gravity and the just the sheer magnitude of places.
But I don't disagree with anything I've said. So if you do, put in the comments. We can pick that up later, and we look forward to seeing you next week in a new episode. Thanks again for being with us here on Theology Is Fun.
Made you feel you should have been gone. No, now I
and I should have been gone.
Now we're rocking.